in general has seen a spike in anti-Semitism, and at the same time has drifted in a direction that's really contrary to our Torah values. The answer to both questions is the same. We have to realize we're foreigners in a strange land. We don't belong here. We're guests. We're outsiders. For a while we became too comfortable. We're not. We don't belong. America, a Medina Shel Chesed, has values that are very similar to the what they call the Judeo-Christian values, or the values that come from Teresenu HaKadoshah. But it's not really true, if you think about it. The Torah says, Lo Sirtzach. The Torah says, Lo Tignaivu. And lahavdil, American law forbids murder, forbids stealing, etc. They sound like they're the same, but only topically. There's a major difference between our values and American values. In America, when you're forbidden to kill somebody, that's because everyone has a right to life. Every human being has a right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Those are the basic American values. The Torah doesn't say that. The Torah says, Lo Sirtzach. You have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to behave properly. And killing somebody, stealing from somebody, is a violation of your responsibility. They are two different things. One focuses on the rights of people. And people have a right to retain their money. Now, if everyone's thinking about rights, they're thinking about themselves. The Torah focuses on responsibility. You have a responsibility to behave properly. You have a responsibility to keep your hands to yourself. You have a responsibility to be honest and not touch other people's money. Those are diametrically opposing views that do have the same result. If you need to be explained a little more clearly, I'll give you a mashal. Let's say you have an employer and an employee. Each has rights and each has responsibilities. Now, by American values, and this is the way it works, an employee focuses on his rights. The employee has rights to a fair paycheck, being paid on time, to be treated properly. An employee has rights to certain days off, certain benefits. An employer, on the other hand, has rights. He has rights to expect that the job be done. In that world, each is focusing on his rights. Now, switch to the Torah's view of things. The boss, the employer, has a responsibility to pay his worker on time, to the day. He has a responsibility to treat his worker properly. If his worker is working with food, he has to let him eat from the food. The employer has responsibilities. The Torah says you focus on your responsibilities. The employee has responsibilities. He's responsible to give a fair day's work for a day's wage. He has a responsibility to be honest with his boss's money. It's a different world, a world in which the employer and the employee focus on their responsibilities is a Torah world. It's a moral world. It's an ethical world. A world in which the employer and employee are each focusing on their respective rights is a world of me. It's all about me. It's all about what I'm supposed to get. They're two worlds. And because America's a Medina Shel Chesed, it's just been for a very long time that we've gotten comfortable and seen the values of America as being close to Torah values. They're closer than the values of the Tsar's Russia. They're certainly closer than the values of the dictatorships that we've suffered through in the past. But it's not Teresenu HaKadoshah. We're strangers in this land. And over the last 2 years, where American values have gone to rights, the rights of people who behave in what would otherwise be considered immoral or abnormal ways, they have rights. As long as you focus on their rights, rather than have them focus on their responsibilities, The world just drifts off into a world of pursuit of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. It's a different world. You want to feel the galus? Focus on the differences. There's some sefer writes at the beginning of Parshas Kisaveh, and you know Kisaveh is the parsha of the Teichacha. There's some sefer writes that the story of our galus is of people coming to a country, feeling comfortable there, and then going into galus. Some sefer writes, as long as Jews came to a country and felt like strangers, like outsiders, the anti-Semitic events did not happen. And the first time is in Mitzrayim. When the Shvatim were there were no gezeiros, there were nothing against the Jews. The Jews lived, they were strangers in a foreign land. And the Torah tells us, after the passing of Yosef, after they passed, next generation was comfortable, they felt like they belonged. That's when the gezeiros began. We can still save Galus America and make it safe. Because everything that's happening is orchestrated from above. And it's happening because we're too comfortable here. We're into the American culture of pleasure, enjoyment, getting the most we can out of the physical offerings of the country. If we'll be strangers again, if we'll be visitors and guests, then the Gezerah won't happen. We'll be left alone to the degree that Jews are ever left alone in the Galus. And that's really our goal. You ask about Tisha B'Av. What are the feelings that Tisha B'Av should bring out in a human being? Well, too often they're Tisha B'Av feelings just for that day, which of course is appropriate. But then the day passes and life goes on. It would be much more wonderful if we were in a world where on Tisha B'Av people focused on feelings they should have all year. If people just focused on the fact that we're not in the place we should be. We're not in the land where we belong. We're not in a country which is sympathetic to us, where we're equal partners. We're not. We're just not. It's not just Tisha B'Av. It's all year round. The Tisha B'Av feeling would be much better. We would be better served by a Tisha B'Av if the Tisha B'Av brought out in us a certain blick, a certain look, a certain view of the world, a correct view of the world. Some see it as a depressing view of the world. It's not a depressing view. It's an uplifting view. When you talk about anti-Semitism in the sense of danger, it's depressing. When you talk about anti-Semitism in the sense of recognizing that our values are different, our responsibilities are different. We are different. Anti-Semites are right, we are different. If we focused and we saw it as an uplifting thing, if we saw it as God's promise that Klal Yisrael, wherever we go, will stand apart, then we can be lifted up by it. The events of my lifetime, when they're viewed in an overall way, give a very clear message. The Rabbeinu Shalom is bringing Jews from all over the world to Eretz Yisrael. Now, you can argue for whatever color of religious observance you want. The physical fact is that in the 1940s, there were less than 500,000 Jews in the land of Israel. The British in 1947 had a study done of how many citizens the land of Israel could physically support, meaning the water, the agriculture, everything available in the land. And they came out with a number of 600,000, meaning Jews and Lahavdil Arabs together. That's what the land could support. Since then, every decade or two, the Rebbeinu Shalom has brought Jews, and in millions, to Eretz Yisrael. And in millions. Of course, initially, the refugees from Europe, who flooded the land, Baruch Hashem. And as you all know, since then, it hasn't stopped. In the 1980s, the country of Iran, which was heavily populated with Jews, we forget that Iran was probably the largest haven of Jews in that part of the world. Jews from Iran came in the 80s. In the 90s, there was Jews from Russia. 1 million Jews from Russia came to the land of Israel. 1 million Jews. You know how many had bris milah? There were months, a period of about 18 months, where it was hard to get an emergency room for surgery that wasn't urgent because of Russian Jews doing bris milah. There's not been, since the days of Yeshua coming into the land, such a mass bris milah of adult Jews. It's a period of time that's unheard of. And then since the year 2000, Jews from Europe, as you know, have been coming to Eretz Yisrael. And I always wonder when it's going to be our turn. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is bringing Yidden from everywhere to Eretz Yisrael. And you have to be blind not to see it. Why, what, when, you can argue. But the fact remains that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is bringing Jews to Eretz Yisrael. I'm going to tell you an incredible Chassam Sofer. In the drushes of the Chassam Sofer, he writes the following. He has a kasha. Rachel mevake al boneha me'anoli inachem. As you know, Rachel wept for the Jewish people. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised her. He promised Rachel, V'shavu me'eretz oyev. Don't worry. Don't weep. Jews will return. And Chassam Sofer asks, what? What kind of promise is that? It says in Chumash, at the end of Sefer Devarim, Moshe Rabbeinu says that there'll be a kibbutz galuyos from all the lands, and Jews will return. It has nothing to do with Rachel. Why am I telling you Rachel? V'shavu me'eretz oyev. What kind of promise is that? And Chassam Sofer answers that Jews will return after Mashiach comes. That says in the Torah. The Torah says, I will gather the Jews back. That Jews will return during the Golus, that was the promise to Rachel. Rachel wept. Yidden and Golus, they're going to assimilate, they're going to disappear. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, V'shavu me'eretz oyev, meaning they're going to return from a land of enemies. That's not Yemais HaMashiach. Yemais HaMashiach is not Eretz Oyev. V'shavu me'eretz oyev, so Chassam Sofer, they're going to come back. Now bear in mind, if someone says it today, he's a prophet after the prophecy was fulfilled. Some Sofer is writing this in the early 1800s. There were a smattering of Jews in the land of Israel. There were very few Jews in the land of Israel. And some Sofer is writing this, V'shavu me'eretz oyev. It's an incredible thing. And we see it. The recognition that we don't belong. The recognition that we're in the wrong country, we're in the wrong land. That's something we have to absorb. That's the message of the changing world of the last couple of years. That's the message of reaction to anti-Semitism. That's the view of Golus. We're strangers here. Now we're here. If a Jew feels he could serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu better here, so he's here and not in Eretz Yisrael. But we're here as foreigners. We're here as guests. We're here not where we belong. That's the timely message of the post-pandemic world, and more than post-pandemic, it's post-upheaval. Our world has shifted to the left. And in the states and cities where Frum Jews are prominent, the world has shifted to the left, to the point that the isolated areas of Frum Jews are the only so-called conservative areas in the whole city or in the whole state, wherever we're located. In other words, we stand out. We're strangers. We're foreigners. We don't belong. Yes, that's a message. It's a very clear message. We have to hear it. Now we have to fight it, we have to hear it, we have to absorb it. It's really become part of who we are and what we are. We're strangers in a land. We have to behave as guests, behave properly, behave in a way that doesn't make us unwelcome because of our actions. But we're foreigners, we're guests. And to stand up and to scream and to protest is not the reaction. The proper reaction is a focus, an inner focus by each individual Yid of who we are, where we are, and a focus on doing the things we have to do. There was another message during the pandemic, and that really was the Mesiras Nefesh of the Mechanchim and the Rebbeim. Ashreichem Yisroel. Jews live on Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh makes Koiches HaTara work, makes Koiches HaTara focus. The Gross said, and Rashab quotes him in his Sefer, every time there's Mesiras Nefesh during the Golus, the Koiches HaTara go down. Look at the world in the last 18 months. Public school teachers all over have been suing to stop schools from reopening. They've been going to court, applying political pressure, receiving concessions to keep the schools on Zoom, keep everybody out, fighting tooth and nail. And our Mechanchim, our Rebbeim, just the opposite. They're pushing and fighting to have regular classes, full classes, to just push and do and go ahead and do. It's absolutely incredible. Incredible thing. So we live in very unique times. The world has changed in my lifetime. I'm not yet an old man. The world has changed. And we live in it as if it's normal. Rabbeinu HaKadosh had two Talmidim, Rav and Shmuel, who fled Eretz Yisrael because of the oppression and started yeshivas in Bavel. From the day they left Eretz Yisrael, the center of Torah was not in Eretz Yisrael for about 2,000 years. The center of Psak Halacha was not in Eretz Yisrael. When I grew up, the center of Psak Halacha was here, in America, in New York. Before the war, the centers of Psak Halacha were for the Litvische in Lita, Vilna, the Chassidish world, Preshburg, and the other cities of the Chassidish world. It was never Eretz Yisrael. You don't realize it's in my lifetime. 2,000 years have changed. The center of Torah is Eretz Yisrael. The center of Psak Halacha is Eretz Yisrael. The center of everything Yiddish is Eretz Yisrael. What to focus on? Tisha B'Av. There's so much beauty to focus on. The Avelus is that we don't feel it on the Neshamas HaSol Fargashmiist, on the Neshamas HaSol New Yorked or Americanized. That we don't feel it. Open your eyes, look around. There's a lot of reasons to be uplifted and inspired by what's going on around us. Be afraid. The Gemara derides people who fear when instead of fearing, you could be uplifted. Let's hope that will be Zeicha, that the message of these years will come out in a beautiful way in Tisha B'Av. We'll have the real feelings, the real hergation, the real appreciation of the schus to feel the golus, the schus to feel we don't belong, the schus to have our eyes towards Eretz Yisrael. It's just an absolutely incredible thing. The Torah is in Eretz Yisrael, Yidden are in Eretz Yisrael, and to paraphrase, Ani b'ktzei hamarav ve'enai lemizrach. My eyes are to Eretz Yisrael. And that's what we have to feel.